Conjuring the Spirits of the Queen Mary. Chapter 1. The Call of the Queen Mary. The night was cold and overcast, with a heavy shroud of fog clinging to the dark waters of Long Beach Harbor. On a winding, dimly lit street, the aged phone in the Warrens' living room rang insistently. Ed and Lorraine Warren were well accustomed to late-night phone calls, but this one carried an air of urgency that sent shivers down their spines. Lorraine, her long, auburn hair cascading gently over her shoulders, was the first to answer. Her fingers trembled as she brought the receiver to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice tempered by decades of confronting the supernatural. The voice on the other end was strained, almost desperate. It belonged to Richard Holloway, one of the Queen Mary's owners. "Lorraine, Ed, it's Richard," he began, his words laced with anxiety. "We need your help. The Queen Mary, it's become unbearable. The malevolent activity has escalated, and we don't know what to do." As Lorraine listened to Richard's plea, her gaze shifted to Ed, who was meticulously arranging his tools at his workbench, but he stopped, sensing the urgency in her eyes. "Richard, what's happening on the Queen Mary?" Lorraine asked, concern evident in her voice. Holloway's voice wavered as he described the horrors unfolding aboard the historic ocean liner. Violent apparitions, phantom footsteps echoing in the corridors, and possessions had become an everyday occurrence. The ship's crew and guests were living in perpetual fear, and the Queen Mary's once vibrant spirit was now marred by malevolence. Ed walked over to Lorraine, his strong, weathered hands gently squeezing her shoulder. "We'll be there, Richard," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "We'll do everything we can to help." Holloway's relief was palpable, even through the phone line. "Thank you, Ed, Lorraine. We don't know where else to turn. Please come as soon as you can." As the call ended, Ed and Lorraine exchanged a knowing look. They were no strangers to the supernatural, but the Queen Mary had a sinister reputation. It was a place where history and suffering had left deep imprints, and the malevolent force that now inhabited it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Lorraine's hazel eyes, a window to a world of unseen forces, were filled with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She said softly, "The Queen Mary calls for us, Ed. We have a duty to help the living and the dead find peace." Ed nodded, his steady resolve mirrored in his deep, caring eyes. "We'll face whatever haunts that ship together, as we always do." With the decision made, the Warrens began packing their equipment, preparing for a journey that would take them deep into the heart of darkness, into the depths of the Queen Mary's haunted history, and into the unknown. Chapter 2. Entering the Haunted Vessel. The Queen Mary loomed before them, a mammoth of steel and history, her dark silhouette cutting through the thick fog that seemed to cling to her like a shroud. The ship, once a symbol of elegance and luxury, now emanated an aura of foreboding. As Ed and Lorraine stepped onto the gangway, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the malevolence that seemed to seep from every rivet and rusted bulkhead. Lorraine's eyes scanned the surroundings. Her intuitive nature had always been finely attuned to the spiritual energy of a place. As she inhaled deeply, the salt-laden sea air seemed tainted with an acrid, otherworldly essence. Her hazel eyes met Ed's, and she whispered, "Ed, the Queen Mary is a vessel of pain and suffering. We need to tread carefully." Ed nodded in agreement, his strong, burly frame contrasting with the ship's ghostly aura. With their equipment in tow, they ventured deeper into the vessel, the creaking of the ship's time-worn boards echoing in their ears. The ship seemed to groan in response to their intrusion, as if it were a living being aware of their presence. In the bowels of the Queen Mary, the Warrens and their team gathered. The investigators and mediums they had brought along were a diverse group, each with their unique talents, a historian who knew the ship's history like the back of his hand, a medium whose abilities allowed her to communicate with the spirits, and a technical expert with a penchant for capturing supernatural phenomena on camera. Ed addressed the team, his voice resonating with authority. "We are here to bring peace to the spirits that haunt this ship and to rid it of the malevolent force that plagues it. We must work together and rely on each other's strengths." Lorraine introduced the team to the ship's staff and some of the few remaining guests who had chosen to stay during the investigation. Many had dark circles under their eyes from sleepless nights filled with unexplained noises and apparitions. "We need to understand what everyone has experienced," Lorraine said, her soothing voice providing reassurance. "Please share your stories. Any detail, no matter how small, can be a crucial piece of the puzzle." One by one, the ship's crew and remaining passengers began to recount their encounters with the supernatural. Apparitions in vintage clothing, inexplicable cold spots, the ghostly sounds of laughter, and the feeling of being watched permeated their narratives. Each tale painted a chilling picture of the Queen Mary's torment. As the interviews continued, the team felt the oppressive presence of the ship's history weigh heavily upon them. They knew that to confront the malevolent force that had taken root, they would need to unearth the darkest secrets hidden within the Queen Mary's metal heart. With their investigation underway and the stage set for what promised to be a grueling journey into the unknown, Ed and Lorraine Warren prepared to confront the malevolence that had made the Queen Mary its unholy abode. The spirits of the ship's past, now joined by the living, awaited their help in dispelling the darkness that had taken hold. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The team's investigation into the Queen Mary's malevolent presence continued, guided by the shared resolve of Ed and Lorraine Warren, their team of investigators, and the gifted mediums at their side. The air within the ship grew colder as they ventured deeper, and the echo of their footsteps seemed to resonate with the ship's haunted past. Their first encounter with the ship's lingering spirits occurred on the B deck, once a luxurious haven for first-class passengers. As they explored, the flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the polished wooden panels. It was here that the spirits began to make their presence known. Ed and Lorraine, joined by their team and the sensitive mediums, suddenly felt a drop in temperature and an electric charge in the air. Whispers, faint but unmistakable, filled their ears, like a ghostly murmuring in a foreign tongue. Shadows flitted across their vision, and the hair on their arms stood on end. The spirits of passengers from bygone eras revealed themselves. A woman in an elegant 1930s gown appeared, her face etched with sorrow. She introduced herself as Amelia, a passenger who had perished on the ship's maiden voyage. Her story was one of unfulfilled dreams, lost love, and an untimely death. Her disembodied voice echoed through the corridor, recounting the night the ship had struck another vessel, the RMS Curacao, in 1942. As her story unfolded, the team could almost feel the impact that had set both the Queen Mary and the Curacao into a deadly embrace. Further exploration of the ship brought the team in contact with other spirits. Soldiers who had been transported on the Queen Mary during wartime began to manifest, their uniforms tattered and their faces etched with the pain of separation from their loved ones. The ship had once been used as a troop transport during World War II, and the soldiers shared stories of camaraderie, longing for home, and the constant fear of submarine attacks. Eerie sounds echoed throughout the ship, distant laughter, phantom footsteps, and the haunting melody of a long-forgotten song. The spirits' appearances were fleeting, like flickering film frames from the past, but their stories were vivid, painting a haunting portrait of the ship's history. As the team delved deeper into their interactions with these spirits, they realized that the Queen Mary's malevolence was intrinsically linked to the unresolved emotions of those who had once called the ship home. To bring peace to the vessel, they needed to understand the lingering pain that had bound these souls to the Queen Mary's haunted corridors. The stage was set for a deeper investigation into the ship's history and the malevolent force that threatened to shatter the lives of those still aboard. The spirits of the Queen Mary were reaching out, longing for their stories to be told, and the Warrens and their team were there to listen. Chapter 4: Malevolent Manifestations. The Queen Mary had revealed glimpses of its haunted history, but the ship held deeper, darker secrets within its time-worn bulkheads. As the Warrens and their team continued their investigation, they couldn't ignore the growing malevolence that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the ship itself. Ed, Lorraine, and their team gathered in the ship's grand ballroom, its chandeliers hanging like ancient crystal specters from the ceiling. The atmosphere within was heavy, thick with a sense of anticipation. It was in this grand space that some of the most disturbing occurrences had transpired. As they set up their equipment, a quiet unease settled upon them. The Queen Mary had been a place of entertainment and revelry in its prime, but now the spirit of those times had been twisted into something sinister. Apparitions of elegantly dressed dancers twirling in macabre waltzes had been witnessed, their faces twisted with anguish. Eerie, spectral music played, drifting through the room without any apparent source. Lorraine's intuition was at its peak, and she felt the unseen eyes that followed their every move. "Ed," she whispered, "I can sense the presence of something much darker here. It's like an undercurrent of malevolence, tainting the very essence of the ship." Ed nodded, his gaze fixed on a distant figure that appeared to waver in and out of existence. A man in a tuxedo, his hollow eyes locked onto them. "We need to find out what's causing this darkness to fester," Ed said, his voice resolute. Their investigation led them through the ship's hallways and narrow passageways, each step unveiling more of the Queen Mary's secrets. They found a hidden room, concealed behind layers of peeling wallpaper, that had once served as an impromptu morgue during wartime, a grim reminder of the ship's dark past. The team began experiencing strange and unnerving phenomena. Doors slammed shut inexplicably, cold spots materialized in front of them, and a sense of being watched was constant. One of the mediums claimed to have been momentarily possessed, her voice changing as she spoke in tongues, warning the team of impending danger. The ship's dark history unraveled as they uncovered stories of tragic accidents, suicides, and suffering during its transatlantic voyages. As the malevolent manifestations intensified, it became clear that the spirits of the Queen Mary were not merely passive observers of their investigation. They were active participants in a tormenting performance. Lorraine's visions became more disturbing as she saw glimpses of passengers' last moments, their fear, and the suffering etched into the very fabric of the ship. She became more determined than ever to bring an end to the malevolence. With each passing day, the malevolent force grew stronger, and the team's resolve was tested as they confronted increasingly violent apparitions. It was clear that they were dealing with a force unlike anything they had ever encountered, one that threatened to consume the Queen Mary in darkness. As the chapter came to a close, the Warrens and their team were left with the chilling realization that they were entangled in a battle against a malevolent entity that seemed to feed on the ship's tortured past, and time was running out to unveil the truth and put an end to the Queen Mary's relentless hauntings. Chapter 5: The Ancient Entity. The Queen Mary's malevolence had intensified, but the Warrens and their team remained undeterred. With the haunting manifestations and unexplained phenomena escalating, they were determined to uncover the ancient darkness that lay at the heart of the ship's torment. Ed and Lorraine delved deeper into their research, poring over historical records and interviewing survivors of the Queen Mary's wartime voyages. They were searching for any clue, any inkling that could provide a key to unraveling the malevolent force that threatened to consume the ship. In a dusty archive room, they uncovered a document that would send chills down their spines. It was a diary kept by a young soldier who had been assigned to guard a sealed chamber on the Queen Mary during its wartime service. The diary spoke of a malevolent presence, of screams echoing from within, and of the crew's determination to keep the chamber closed at all costs. The existence of the sealed chamber piqued the Warrens' curiosity. With the help of the ship's historian, they discovered its location deep within the bowels of the ship, behind layers of metal and forgotten memories. The room had been locked for decades, its dark secrets sealed away. As the team entered the chamber, they were struck by an oppressive atmosphere, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to cling to the walls. Inside, they found an altar adorned with arcane symbols, and the room's walls were etched with cryptic markings. Lorraine, her eyes now a deep, otherworldly shade of blue, reached out to touch the altar. In an instant, she was overcome by a chilling vision of an ancient ritual. She saw a group of shadowy figures, robed and chanting incantations in a language that was neither living nor dead. The vision revealed a sinister entity being bound to the Queen Mary, its dark essence merging with the souls of those on board. Gasping for breath, Lorraine shared her vision with the team. She explained that the entity they were dealing with was not merely a collection of tormented spirits, but an ancient force, a malevolent entity that had been imprisoned within the ship for centuries. The entity's intentions were revealed through Lorraine's visions. It sought to merge the souls of the ship's inhabitants, using their pain and suffering as a source of power. Its ultimate goal was to break free from the Queen Mary and wreak havoc on the world once more. The Warrens and their team knew that they had to find a way to weaken the entity's hold on the ship, to disrupt the ritual that bound it to the vessel. They also realized that they had to confront the entity directly, no matter the risks. As they left the sealed chamber, the air was heavy with the weight of the revelation. The Queen Mary was not merely haunted, it was a prison for an ancient and malevolent entity that threatened to unleash unimaginable horror if it was not stopped. The team's determination grew, for they had unearthed the darkest secret of the ship, and now their battle with the entity would determine the fate of the Queen Mary and all those aboard. Chapter 6: Uncovering the Entity's Origins. The revelation of the malevolent entity's existence had left the team shaken, but Ed and Lorraine Warren were driven to uncover the ancient origins of this force that had ensnared the Queen Mary. Their research and investigations took them deeper into the ship's past as they scoured records, spoke with historians, and consulted with their gifted team members. A breakthrough came as they stumbled upon a set of cryptic journals penned by a former member of the ship's crew. These journals hinted at an unsanctioned ritual performed deep within the bowels of the Queen Mary during her transatlantic voyages in the early 19th century. The pages described a cabal of individuals who had sought to harness otherworldly powers to ensure the ship's success, prosperity, and a speedy voyage. As Ed, Lorraine, and their team delved further into the journals, they discovered that the ritual had involved the sacrifice of souls, bound to an entity they referred to as the Haunter of the Deep. This entity was believed to be an ancient and malevolent force associated with dark water spirits, a being that demanded blood and suffering in exchange for its dark gifts. The ritual, as detailed in the journals, was both elaborate and gruesome. It required the souls of the ship's passengers, their pain and suffering, to be channeled into the Haunter of the Deep, thus ensuring the Queen Mary's protection and prosperity. It was an unholy pact that had been hidden within the ship's history for centuries. Realizing the entity's origin was the key to understanding how to weaken its hold on the Queen Mary. They needed to disrupt the ritual's power source, but they faced a daunting challenge. The entity had been accumulating strength for years, feeding off the ship's dark history, the pain of its passengers, and the sacrifices that had been made to it. Lorraine, haunted by her visions and newfound knowledge, understood the urgency of their mission. She shared her concerns with Ed and the team. The entity is growing stronger with each passing day, she said, her voice tinged with worry. If we don't act soon, it may become unstoppable, unleashing a reign of darkness upon the ship and beyond. The team understood that the malevolent force was not only a threat to the Queen Mary, but to the world at large. They had to find a way to disrupt the ancient ritual and sever the entity's connection to the ship. Their quest now carried the weight of centuries-old secrets, and the clock was ticking. The entity's power was growing, and the team knew that they had to act swiftly, for the Queen Mary and all those aboard were in grave danger. The battle with the malevolent force had taken on a new urgency, and the Warrens and their team were prepared to confront the darkness that had taken root within the ship. Chapter 7: Vengeful Confrontations. The revelation of the ancient ritual and the malevolent entity's origin weighed heavily on the minds of the Warrens and their team. As they continued their investigation, the malevolent presence aboard the Queen Mary grew more restless, stirring the spirits of the ship's past with an unquenchable fury. One fateful night, as the team gathered in a narrow passageway, a chilling wind whipped through the corridor, extinguishing their lanterns and plunging them into darkness. The air was thick with anticipation, and the feeling of being watched was palpable. Suddenly, the spirits of soldiers who had perished on the ship during World War II materialized before them. They were clad in military uniforms, their faces etched with grim determination and longing for home. The soldiers' tormented voices resonated with echoes of wartime, their stories of camaraderie and fear revealing a desperate need for closure. Terrifying confrontations ensued as the vengeful spirits began to express their anger and frustration. They blamed the living for the horrors they had endured during wartime, seeing the team as an extension of those who had allowed their suffering to persist. Apparitions, once passive observers, now turned into aggressors, lashing out at the team in fits of spectral rage. Ed, Lorraine, and their team members faced horrifying manifestations. Spectral figures lunging at them, cold hands reaching for their throats, and the sensation of being encircled by a wall of malevolent energy. The team's medium, in particular, bore the brunt of the spirit's wrath, becoming a vessel for their pain and anger. The Warrens and their team realized that they had to engage with the spirits, not as adversaries, but as messengers. Through intense sessions of communication, they learned of the soldiers' yearning for recognition and healing. They needed the living to understand the horrors they had experienced and acknowledge their sacrifices. The soldiers' vengeful confrontations gradually transformed into heartbreaking confessions of sorrow and loss. With compassion, the team helped the spirits find solace, and they began to release their grip on the ship, no longer bound by their unrelenting pain and anger. Yet, as the soldiers' spirits began to find peace, the malevolent entity's presence loomed, darker and more powerful than ever. It seemed that the entity had been feeding off the turmoil and suffering of the Queen Mary's tormented souls, using their pain to strengthen its hold on the ship. The Warrens and their team realized that their mission was far from over. The entity's endgame was becoming clearer: to merge the souls of the ship's inhabitants, using their pain and suffering to break free from the Queen Mary. They understood that they needed to act swiftly to save the ship from being consumed by the malevolent force. As they continued their investigation, the Queen Mary's haunted corridors echoed with the stories of the vengeful spirits and the looming darkness of the entity. The team knew that they had to confront the malevolent force directly and unravel the sinister ritual that bound it to the ship. The battle for the Queen Mary had reached a critical juncture, with the Warrens and their team standing as the last line of defense against the malevolent entity's relentless wrath. Chapter 8: An Ominous Warning. The investigations into the Queen Mary's malevolent entity had grown increasingly intense, and as the team delved deeper into the ship's dark history, a sense of impending doom hung heavy in the air. Lorraine's visions had grown more frequent and unsettling, and one fateful night, she received a vision that shook her to her core. In the dimly lit cabin where the team had gathered to review their findings, Lorraine's eyes rolled back, and her body tensed. Her breathing grew labored, and she began to speak in a voice not her own. "Darkness, all consuming darkness," she muttered, her voice trembling. "The ship, the Queen Mary, it is consumed by darkness. Time is slipping away." The room fell silent as the team watched Lorraine, a shiver coursing through each of them. Her vision played out like a sinister tapestry, painting a bleak picture of the ship's future. She saw the Queen Mary overtaken by an impenetrable shroud of darkness, with the malevolent entity reigning supreme. The entity, a grotesque form of shadow and malevolence, consumed the souls of the ship's passengers, their tormented cries echoing through the haunted corridors. The very structure of the ship seemed to twist and warp, as if the Queen Mary herself was writhing in agony. When Lorraine's vision finally ended, she was left trembling and pale, her eyes wide with dread. "We are running out of time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The entity's power is growing, and its endgame is nearly upon us." The team knew that Lorraine's vision was not to be taken lightly. It was a dire warning of the horrors that awaited the ship and its trapped souls if they failed to stop the entity. The malevolent force was closing in on its ultimate goal, and they had to act quickly to prevent the Queen Mary's descent into eternal darkness. Ed, his face etched with determination, addressed the team. "We must unite and confront the entity head on. We have learned of the ritual that binds it to the ship, and we know what we must do to weaken its grip." The team nodded in agreement, their resolve strengthened by Lorraine's vision. They knew that their mission had taken on an even greater urgency. Time was no longer their ally, and the malevolent entity's power was growing with each passing moment. As they prepared to confront the entity and disrupt the ritual that bound it to the ship, the team carried the weight of their mission, knowing that the fate of the Queen Mary and all those aboard rested on their shoulders. The ominous warning had set the stage for the final battle against the darkness that had taken root within the ship, and the Warrens and their team were prepared to face it head on. Chapter 9: The Battle for the Queen Mary. The night had fallen on the Queen Mary, casting its haunted halls in an eerie silence, save for the distant creaking of the ship's time-worn beams. The Warrens and their team had prepared for the final, harrowing battle against the malevolent entity that had taken root within the ship. The air was thick with trepidation as they gathered within the chamber that had once hosted the unholy ritual. Lorraine, her visions having guided their preparations, led the team through the intricate process of disrupting the ancient ritual. The room was adorned with esoteric symbols and candles, and a circle of salt had been carefully laid out to create a protective barrier. Every step they took had been informed by the knowledge they had gathered, for the fate of the Queen Mary and the souls trapped within it rested on their success. As the team began to chant the incantations that Lorraine had discovered in her visions, the air grew charged with an ominous energy. Shadows danced on the walls, and the temperature plummeted, causing their breath to fog. The malevolent entity was aware of their presence and was not about to be vanquished without a fight. In an instant, the entity manifested, a grotesque form of darkness and despair. It taunted the team with malevolent laughter, attempting to break their resolve. Whispers of suffering and death filled the chamber, and apparitions of tormented souls appeared, their hollow eyes fixed on the team. Possession became a real threat as the entity sought to gain a foothold in the bodies of the living. It took hold of one of the team members, who spoke in tongues and thrashed about, channeling the entity's anger and hatred. Ed and Lorraine stood firm, their faith and determination unwavering. They knew that the battle was not just for the ship, but for the very souls of those aboard. They called upon their faith and the power of their convictions to counter the entity's darkness. The supernatural battle raged on, with the team facing supernatural phenomena that defied explanation. Objects levitated, the room vibrated with an otherworldly energy, and the ship itself seemed to groan and shudder. It was a battle of wills and spiritual strength, where the forces of good and evil clashed in a titanic struggle. As the minutes turned to hours, the Warrens and their team refused to yield. Their chanting grew stronger, and their protective circle held fast. The entity's power waned, its grotesque form beginning to dissipate into the darkness from whence it came. In a final, heart-pounding climax, the entity let out a deafening roar of anger and despair before retreating. The ship trembled one last time, and the malevolent force, weakened and defeated, was forced to relinquish its hold on the Queen Mary. With the malevolent entity vanquished and the ancient ritual disrupted, a profound stillness descended upon the ship. The team's efforts had not only saved the Queen Mary, but had also brought peace to the trapped souls who had suffered for centuries. As they emerged from the chamber, the team was left breathless, but victorious, their faith in their abilities reaffirmed. The Queen Mary, once a place of darkness and despair, had been freed from the malevolent entity's grip. Chapter 10: Restoring Peace. With the malevolent entity weakened and forced to retreat, the Queen Mary stood on the brink of a new dawn. The ship's benevolent spirits, long trapped by the entity's darkness, were now free to lend their aid to the Warrens and their team. Together, they initiated a powerful exorcism that had been carefully devised by Lorraine. The ship's grand ballroom, once the epicenter of haunting apparitions and eerie sounds, became the site of their final showdown with the malevolent entity. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, and the air was thick with anticipation. The Warrens, their team, and the ship's liberated spirits joined hands in a circle, each member reciting incantations passed down through generations. The chanting grew louder, their voices harmonizing with a sense of unity and purpose. The entity, sensing its imminent defeat, fought back with a final surge of malevolence. The room trembled, and the apparitions of suffering souls tried to break their concentration. It was a battle of wills, a final clash between the forces of light and darkness. In a climactic moment, Lorraine's eyes glowed with an ethereal light, her body levitating as she channeled the spirits of the Queen Mary's past. Her voice carried the weight of centuries of torment, and with a final, resounding incantation, the entity was forced to retreat. The malevolent force, its grotesque form writhing in pain, dissipated into the shadows and was banished back to the supernatural realm from whence it came. The Queen Mary trembled once more, but this time it was a tremor of liberation and release. The atmosphere on the ship began to change as the entity's grip weakened. The creaking of time-worn wood and eerie sounds of suffering gave way to a sense of calm. The temperature rose, and the long-suffering spirits of the Queen Mary found solace and peace. As the ship's atmosphere transformed, the team watched with a sense of profound relief. The Queen Mary was no longer a place of torment and darkness, but a vessel of tranquility and healing. The spirits of the past, no longer trapped by the entity's malevolence, began to fade away, their faces etched with gratitude. The Warrens, their team, and the ship's liberated spirits shared a moment of quiet reflection. The Queen Mary had been restored to its former glory, and the tormented souls that had once haunted its halls were finally at peace. In the wake of their victory, the Warrens and their team departed the Queen Mary, leaving it behind as a symbol of resilience and redemption. The ship now stood as a testament to their unwavering dedication in the face of malevolence, a place where the past had been laid to rest and the spirits of the Queen Mary's history had finally found peace. As they looked back at the ship one final time, the Warrens and their team knew that their mission was complete. The Queen Mary, once a place of darkness and despair, was now a sanctuary of peace and healing, a living testament to the power of their faith and determination. Hello, fellow fiction fans. I'm thrilled you're enjoying Muted Gamer Fiction. Your support means the world to me. If you're loving our stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement fuels our storytelling. I'd love to hear from you. Share fanfic ideas, or just say hi in the comments. Let's build this community together. Thanks for being part of Muted Gamer Fiction. Keep listening, and your support keeps the stories coming. Can't wait to see your ideas. Happy listening, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next chapter.